work, and I will speak about traps. What is in the budget or amendments to the budget? This document is in the parliament, and representatives from Batkivshchyna faction and Samopomich and experts from Reanimation Package of Reforms will share their impressions and proposals. Please. Good afternoon. Ilya Neskhodovsky, I'm expert of Reanimation Package of Reforms and tax, budget and banking group. As you know, the government brought some proposals of amendments to the state budget. Experts from PR have analyzed those amendments to the state budget. 2147 February 16, 2015, we stated that the government didn't take into account criticisms of many experts as to the necessity to reduce expenditures from the budget to rebuild the structure of the budget and taking into consideration the risks we have on financial markets and on currency market and on when executing certain commitments and because of military aggression. So we identified those risks which the government did not take into consideration when they brought these amendments. And the general concept of those amendments means that the government, taking into account the inflation, they put it more realistically than we have. We don't know how realistic it is now, but they raised the level of inflation from very optimistic level of 13%, and they raised it to 27%. And also they did the same to the dollar rate, and they raised from unrealistic. We can say that now it's more realistic than they had before, but we will show how National Bank recently can handle with the situation on the currency market. The positive is that more external finances to the state budget of Ukraine. That assistance is provided in dollars and in foreign currency, as a result of which we have some payroll. In the cost of this, the rate will go up and the assistance will grow, which is 10 billion, which is announced from IMF for this year. They not only IMF but also other world institutions they suggest. So that will be the amount of the budget of Ukraine. If we multiply, it's half of the budget. It will be for the half of the budget of Ukraine. So that can have a positive influence, and that will reduce risk on the currency market. The main risk for 2015 as to the state budget, as well as the deeper fall of the main reasons of decline of economy are that military activities and the non-solvency of enterprises. And growth of official and hidden unemployment, absence of investments, and drain of capital, and no demand because of frozen tariffs and devaluation and inflation. At the same time, we would like to say that the government doesn't do substantial steps to stimulate business. Amendments to the tax legislation to VAT, they don't stimulate, but quite the opposite. They create additional obstacles as to the administration, like the last term of declaration, because of this so doesn't work. We can state that administration is worse than we had before. Also, they're trying to set up a special accounts for and they will understand, I hope, that state special accounts, that will be the death of the economy. So they say to review such initiatives. Also, they introduce for small and mid business minimal social fee the task of the small business is not to fill the state budget, but to occupation of the population. So they should encourage business to do entrepreneurship. That's the only chance to save economy in the country. The second threat, tax revenues to the state budget, the high, exaggerated, and they have not calculated everything, and they are quite optimistic in the budget, up to 40 billion hryvnia. Despite the reduced sum that should be recounted by the National Bank of Ukraine from state, they should from state budget to state budget 4.4 billion up to 65. That's the sum is exaggerated. It's higher than it must be. The part of it will be part in the cost of emission, which causes the risk of inflation. There is also a risk that in the budget there is the sum of 17 billion hryvnia to finance the deficit of the state budget. In the cost of privatization of state property, state assets, because of investment climate in Ukraine and absence of internal investors, national investors, and because now we announce a technical default that the sum is unrealistic. So to build that we'll get it, it's like to put a mine under ourselves. It will be correct if the government stops quasi expenditures. If they reduce current deficit of Naftogaz of 1.8 billion hryvnia up to 9 billion hryvnia. At the same time, in the budget, they put a big number, 10.7 billion hryvnia, to finance gas supplies to the territory which is occupied. Because of the situation we have now in Ukraine, we believe that such steps are absolutely not needed, and there is no economic base for that. It means that we will finance terrorists, and so that's a threat to national security of Ukraine. And to provide such a sum makes no sense. So there is at a high level of inflation and devaluation if we finance quasi expenditures and decapitalization of banks, for example, and 20 billion hryvnias for the fund to ensure deposits, bank deposits of physical entities. It's quite possible that we'll not get enough of foreign loans if we have no reforms. If the government doesn't reform actively, doesn't run reforms, doesn't fight corruption, doesn't deregulate business, if it doesn't simplify a taxation system, there's a big threat that those sums, those figures they have in the state budget, they will not have those loans, and it means that there could be default to Ukraine because we will not be able to work according to commitments, and there's a threat from military aggression in the east of Ukraine. We need to have a reserve that would allow the government to react in time if threats grow. We need to have financial opportunities to rebuild our economy in such a way that would allow us to react to such threats. Growth of tariffs, which is planned for April 2015 by 3.6 times. On one hand, it will reduce the necessity to finance the needs of Naftogaz. And I would like to explain to all of you that if we don't raise tariffs, then the government will have, through National Bank of Ukraine, they will have to do emission, and that difference in tariffs will be covered with the efficiency, which will cause inflation. Inflation then will pay not as in the form of tariffs, but there will be high prices for the main products, for food, transportation, and the rest. So now the government will get rid of that that approach, and we have to welcome that. So, in the amendments to the state budget for 2015, they consider they have more realistic macroeconomic indicators. But if the cabinet of ministers will not take urgent steps to prevent some threats and risks, if it doesn't have algorithm of its work for emergency situations that we could, then it's quite possible that we'll not be able to work according to these numbers in the state budget. And as to our recommendations, Markevych Yaroslav, and MP, Samopomich faction budget committee. I'm also the position of the budget group of Reanimation Package of Reforms, and I join what I support what my colleagues have told, and I would like to apologize for my colleague from Batkivshchyna faction who is busy because he's busy in the subcommittee. He will not be able to participate in our work. I would like to add some points from general. The government was tried to play the trick they played with us in December. The approach is different. They brought the budget before they brought amendments to the documents which are important for this budget. So last night we received amendments to the tax code, and only after we adopt them we can speak about changes in the budget. Anything can happen, and expenditures and profits or revenues can be different. So it's better to understand with taxes, and only then we can start working on the budget. If we can speak concretely, we'd like to focus your attention that in the budget doesn't take results of selling 3G frequencies. They speak about 6 billion, and but they sell for 10.2 billion. So 4.2 billion they should be included in the budget, not in a profit part, but there's like a part of privatization. But anyways, the deficit of the budget will be smaller. Also, some more points. My point spoke about subsidies. One of the main documents. So we need to build a budget. We need to understand the memorandum we sign with with IMF. That's very important information which can influence on this. Second point, we clearly understand we need to raise tariffs, but we need two things for that. Clear system of subsidies, address subsidies, how we develop it, how we had a meeting with the cabinet of ministers. What we heard from them, how they plan to issue subsidies, it seems it's quite realistic, and the government will make a presentation of that. The second important point is tariffs. How to calculate tariffs? We need to raise the tariffs, but it doesn't make sense to do that if we don't understand how it was done before. According to the coalition agreement, demand from the government to open that information to us for us to analyze how tariffs are created. And some other concrete amendments we suggest to this budget. We have several suggestions. For education, for example, which is, we care about that in our faction. And we have to make some reduction, and to reduce the budget for the Ministry of Education, and by 300 millions, and but we suggest not to just take that sum from the Ministry of from the education budget, but we need to focus that budget to some other needs, like to train engineers who would work for the military industry. Also, construction. We had we prepared some pilots, for example, in Lviv, and with land communication, and from budget they gave 5 million to build the housing for families of those who suffered, who died, or who got wounded during ATO. Those are our suggestions. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Pavlo Kukhta. I'm an expert of the budget and pension in Reanimation Package of Reforms, and I will continue about what we suggest. In our view, in this budget, we need to reduce expenditures by 60 billion. Why? Because there is a big risk that the government will not be able to finance these expenditures because of from what they get from revenues, and that's why they will try to do that through emissions like they did last year, and we see the results, and that's why we have such a rate of hryvnia. For us not to have those problems, and that's in we suggested to cut expenditures by 60 billion and stabilize the budget and to make it more sustainable. We developed some proposals to such reduction. I will name you the biggest items. 20 billion we can save on inventory and organization of the pension fund. That is that's in average what we can save 10 billion, and the pension fund believes that, and the Minister of Finances believes that we can save on the pension fund 30 billion. So we take the average. We suggest to cancel. We should not finance occupied territories and additional revenues from 3G in the structure of in the profit revenue structure, and we should reduce finances which we send to occupied territories. Plus, the government, in our opinion, should motivate economy through deregulation and through motivation of entrepreneurship and improvement of conditions for small and mid-sized business. And the government should use that lever to stimulate economy and to raise revenues, budget revenues, and also they can make the budget more stable. Also, we suggest for small and mid business how they pay VAT and to simplify administration of that tax, and also some other measures. Finally, in our opinion, we need to start reforms of the budget relations in Ukraine because of the war. The government should prioritize its expenditures, and they should split them into 3 levels. The first one, the priority expenditures for the war, and also support of socially vulnerable groups of the population. Those are the priorities among expenditures. The second level, the expenditures for the state functions like healthcare, judicial system, order, public order, etc. So that's why we need to prioritize those taxes, because under conditions of war, healthcare can be more important than. On the third level, expenditures which are not of priority, not important. For example, science. We understand the condition of our science. To spend big money under conditions of war, and when we need lots of money, and we have an economic crisis. If we spend money for higher education, for science, for education programs, for public service, and subsidies to state enterprise which are not strategic, etc. Such expenditures make no sense, and we should cut them. The government should sacrifice them for more important things, for the stability of economy, to finance the war, and to finance principally important social groups and programs. In 2015, in our opinion, the government must do something which they were supposed to do. And in 2014, first of all, there should be audit of the state budget, all the articles, and they should invite international donors and representatives from European community, from civil society, to analyze all expenditures from the budget and to decide which are efficient and needed, which are not efficient and which are corrupted, which are not efficiently used. Because now a big part of the budget is not clear. We don't understand why do we need those expenditures? Nobody knows even why. We should analyze the system of social support in Ukraine, which is which supports all, and it doesn't consider real income. We give cheap gas to rich people who heat palaces, and they burn gas for 60, 70. Poor families. We should support only poor and poorly provided. Questions? Natalia, TVI channel. You're told that amendments to the budget they have more realistic indicators, and they developed them 2 weeks ago. But now we see on the currency market the situation has changed. And hryvnia lost its value by 50%. Do you think they should introduce changes again? Maybe you suggested to index pensions and salaries because of this high level of inflation we observe. The first thing is to macro indexes. The situation on the currency market that's a result of panic. It's not economical position, because we look at correlation of our export and import. If we look at those indexes and that assistance provided by IMF, international institutions, that at present we observe open panic, which is supported by many different information. So it's just the result of panic and actions of some operators of the market which use that information. As to the review in indexes, we should look not at short-term, but at a long-term situation. We should take a month, for example. If during a month the dollar rate will be on a high level, which doesn't meet our forecast, then we should review the budget. But I underline the sums we get from international donors, they meet those sums, and Ukraine must pay according to its commitments, currency commitments. As a result, automatical growth of assistance because of the rate will meet the same growth of those payments. So on the budget, it will not have big influence on the budget. But if the situation doesn't change on the market during the month, and then we have to review those indexes. As to indexation of pensions and salaries, we believe that it doesn't meet a minimal threshold of poverty, which we have in our documents, and that is $5 per day. So people should get minimum. We are lower than international institutions' indexes, and we have a very low index. It's impossible to live for that salary. We have to do it in the following way. Do all need such assistance? I mean, pensions and salaries. So we have a lack of money in the budget. So we have to look which categories of people cannot provide for themselves, who don't have enough to and under conditions. So we should help those groups of people who are not protected. What kind of social justice can we mention if the difference was between the smallest and the biggest pension was 20 times? Somebody received 1,000, somebody received 20,000, and that's not correct. We should review that under conditions. So we are for an increase, for a raise, but to those who really need that assistance from the state, who cannot provide for themselves with the help of some other sources, from some other sources. Last budget indexation, it was supposed to have indexation on December 1st, 2015. Now I believe that we will review that and we'll have the indexations earlier. The issue of rate after we get money from IMF, that's the main point, which will the main thing that will influence on indexation. Let's wait for 2-3 weeks and the picture will be clear. Is it correct that you believe that we should not index like before? There should be a selective indexation, not for all. So we should be selective as to. So we should change the approach to social programs. Yes. We are planning some changes. First of all, we need to move to individual assistance, so addressed, targeted assistance, and when we and also during the transition period, on this stage, the transition should be done automatically by information. So this. People will fill forms. Those who need subsidies, they will send them, and they will be registered, and they will get subsidies. But depending on the burden, the Ministry of Social Policy, they will check it, and then we will make recalculations. You told that that mechanism of subsidies is ready. No, I didn't say it's ready, but I believe that the government will present it in the nearest future. If you know some things from new approaches, you mentioned something. Maybe something else will influence on subsidies. The main point, and a revolutionary point for us, for our system, that we needed to move to the address or to targeted system of social support. Thank you very much. In one